Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Political Power Ranker. I'm Chris Berg, Director of Political Content for Nexstar affiliates across the country. And joining me, as we do every week, Spencer Kimball, Emerson College Polling Director, high above the Boston Commons. Spencer, hello, and welcome to another week of PPR.
Mr. Berg, thanks always for having me, and welcome to Boston. Today we get to look at our own city.
Man, if you're not here, the star is not involved in the show, and we cannot have a show without a star. So here we go. This is what we're doing this week. We're talking Massachusetts, and more specifically, the Boston mayoral race and some of the issues that are surrounding it. Incumbent Michelle Wu is running for her second term, challenged by a person who's very familiar for at least football fans, Josh Kraft. His dad is the owner of the New England Patriots, as many of you probably know and recognize that name. And Spencer, you have some numbers. You just did a poll in the city of Boston, and to share a little bit about more about that race, what are we going to see?
So, Chris, we have an election on Tuesday, September 9th. So we're right before the election, and we polled this race, as you can see, back in February, and it was slightly competitive. Wu was up 43-29, but look what happened over the course of this campaign. Our numbers have shown Wu picked up 29 points, up to 72%, and Josh Kraft has actually lost points. He's down to 22%. So we've seen a lot of movement. Look at that undecided number. Those undecideds have all broken for Wu over the last 8 months or so.
You know, historically, just a quick question on this race. Have we seen such a dominant figure in a second term in Boston politics? And if so, who would that be?
Well, we don't have to go too far back. Generally, Boston mayors get reelected forever. If they win their second term, they're going to be there until they want to drop out. Tom Menino, Mayor Walsh stepped down, and that's what opened up this opportunity for Wu. It's not that surprising to see such a large lead in a primary. If you go to New York, you saw de Blasio have big leads in his primaries. So we see that's where we're at in the race. But it tells me that Kraft wasn't able to mount the type of challenge that a lot of people thought he could against the incumbent.
Interesting stuff, Spencer. And as we always do, we like to bring in political reporters from all across the Nexstar Nation to join us to talk about the numbers that Spencer and his team are generating with new polling. In this instance, and this show, we've got Ted Nesi from our Providence, Rhode Island station. Ted's the political anchor reporter there, has his own Sunday show. Ted, welcome. And
great to be here, Chris.
It's great to see you. And the other person who is joining us is Chuck Williams from our Columbus, Georgia station, a political anchor and reporter down there. So, gentlemen, welcome. Ted, let's go to you. First, talk to us about what you see at your next door neighbor, Boston, in their mayor's race and those numbers. What jumps out at you?
Yeah, I'm here in Providence, and Boston is really the regional capital for New England. So we're all watching this race all over the region. I mean, it is remarkable to see a lead, a 72-22, I think you said, Spencer, is our top line in this poll. I mean, that's a massive lead for Michelle Wu. Spence said it's, we thought maybe she might have some vulnerability here. Certainly that's part of why Josh Kraft got in. But I tend to think it's because she has been running as much against Donald Trump as against Josh Kraft for months now, with help from Trump, talking about Boston being a sanctuary city. She was sent down to Washington to testify, and she's navigated that pretty deftly in a blue city where obviously Trump is not super popular. And then you have the added effect, as you said, the Krafts, or the Bob Kraft, the father of candidate Josh Kraft, is the head of New England, is the owner of the New England Patriots. He's also close to Trump. And so this nexus of forces, a lot of Boston politicos think, is part of why Wu has been able to really just seemingly kind of brush off Kraft at this point.
And Ted, let me ask you a question about the point Spencer made a moment ago, where Boston mayors get elected forever once they're in. So why would a Josh Kraft, big name recognition, big kind of financial footprint in the area, but why would he even take on Michelle Wu, knowing that it may be a fool's errand?
Well, I called a couple solid sources of mine in Greater Boston yesterday as we were preparing for the show. And one thing that kept coming up was that, there is a feeling that Wu is not as deferential to the business community as Mayor Walsh was, as Mayor Menino was. And that's led to frustration among business leaders, the types of people Josh Kraft would be hearing from between his father and also his own longtime leadership at the Boys and Girls Club. So it's possible that Josh Kraft, as he made these decisions and talked to his consultants, got a warped view of maybe how the general electorate was going to feel about Mayor Wu. And then also he might not have expected it to become such a nationalized race with all this talk of immigration and Donald Trump, as opposed to, he wanted to run on things like bike lanes that have led to some frustration in Boston, crime statistics, the economy, stuff like that. So I think Kraft maybe just misjudged what kind of race it was in, but I think also events might have made it a different race from what he expected.
And one last question on just the family and Josh Kraft. What was the reasoning behind this? Is this something that he always wanted to do to get into politics? His other three brothers aren't. His dad's not.
I don't want to overstate my deep biographical knowledge of Josh Kraft and where his head has been. I will say he's a respected nonprofit leader up there. He's widely credited with doing a very good job running the Boys and Girls Club of Boston for a lot of years. And so I'd imagine he had a lot of people telling him, he'd had an interest in this, saying, "Oh, Josh, you're the best, you should run." We all know how that happens with people testing the waters, talking to their kitchen cabinet, talking to friends and potential allies. But generally you're talking to people who already like you and are going to say what you want to hear. How is the general electorate going to react? And I think that's what we're seeing in this new poll from Spencer.
Right. And Spencer, you got another set of data set that we want to look at that kind of shows the strength of Michelle Wu.
Yeah, and in Boston is a minority majority city, remember, where a majority of the residents are minorities. And what we see here is that in 2021, when she was running, there were other Black candidates that were taking a lot of that vote and siphoning into different lanes. It looks like she's been able to coalesce all of these different ethnic and racial groups into her camp, which is really a problem for Kraft to be able to find that base of support. So when we took a look at who they voted for in 2021, we see Kraft is picking up the alternative candidate who was the more conservative candidate. So to Ted's point, even though Kraft himself may not be in the camp with Trump, the Trump voters in Boston see him as their candidate. And that's something that he hasn't been able to shake. And it's probably been a detriment to him over these 8 months.
Ted, thoughts?
I agree. I think, if Donald Trump is seen as being on the ballot for a lot of people in Boston, and Donald Trump did not do well in Boston. And so, and then I think we have to give some credit to Michelle Wu for handling, we've seen other blue state leaders get pretty mixed up as they tried to figure out how to navigate, attacks from Trump, unexpected moves by his administration. Wu has seemingly handled that pretty well. I know I referenced it before, but I do think a key moment was when she was down testifying before Congress on Ash Wednesday with this, everyone now remembers the image, she had the cross, she's Catholic, on her head because it was Ash Wednesday, and navigated that well, seemed to get fairly positive press coverage back home. All politics is local. Massachusetts is one of, if not the bluest state in the country, and this is the capital city. So it shouldn't be a shock that someone, a progressive figure who is very opposed to Donald Trump and is getting attacked by Donald Trump, can do this well with that electorate.
And she's taking on Donald Trump and making him the alternative and really growing herself as like the Gavin Newsom here of Boston, where she's making that fight locally. You're not seeing it on the national stage, but around here, we definitely get that vibe.
One other just quick thought, Chris, I think it's important for people to understand. The Kraft campaign has also not been a well-oiled machine. I mean, literally in the 12 to 15 hours before we taped the show, he lost 2 more key advisors, including Will Kaiser, who used to work for Governor Baker. So they've had a lot of turmoil on the Kraft side, maybe partly because it hasn't been going well. That hasn't helped them either.
But that goes to their messaging. They've been taking on messaging like bike lanes and a new stadium here that are somewhat popular issues and on the minority side of these issues, which is a very interesting play that he started with, and it doesn't seem to have played out.
All good stuff. You've got more data to back up what we're seeing. Let's put that next slide up.
So here we're taking a look at the most important issue, not just here in Boston, but also nationally. And I want us to all look. In Boston, we see threats as democracy as our top issue. This is, in my opinion, the first poll that we've seen in our numbers where That has happened. Now, the economy and housing, you can combine those as pocketbook issues, and it gets it up to almost 30%. But threats to democracy is a main issue on this campaign and in this cycle that we haven't seen in previous years. And we're going to see how the candidates, and Wu has been playing it very well, how she uses this not only here in Boston, but on the national scene after this election.
And Ted, what are you seeing regionally about threats to democracy as being a issue that is becoming a forefront one in that part of the country?
Well, I do think certainly in these Democratic states that I cover, Massachusetts and Rhode Island, it's certainly probably more of a concern because you just have a more Democratic-leaning electorate. I also think, threats to democracy is sort of a proxy for opposition to Trump administration moves all the way, I think, across the spectrum, sometimes in polling. And, if you think about Boston's experience so far this year in 2025 specifically, not only have you had these attacks about sanctuary cities and what Mayor Wu's been going back and forth with, but you also have the huge assault on Harvard, which, however people feel about Harvard, most of us in this region did not get into Harvard if we even tried. It's an engine of the economy. And I do think there's a feeling that cuts to Harvard, cuts to higher education in general, meds and eds, healthcare, higher ed, that is the base of the greater Boston economy. And so I think there's this feeling of assault that's broader there. And I read that at least partly into the threats to democracy answer from folks.
You know what? We have more about threats to democracy, and we're going to bring in Chuck Williams here in the second segment. So stand by, stay with us. We'll be right back with more of Political Power Ranker. Welcome back to Political Power Ranker, where the movers and shakers and rule makers are held to account by the man, the legend, Spencer Kimball, Emerson College Polling. And we have Ted Nesi, a political reporter anchor from our Providence station, joining us as well. Spencer, I want to jump back into one graphic that we had at the end of our first segment. It's about most important issues for folks up in the Boston area. And economy is about half of what, from a concerning standpoint, of what the rest of the country is. And we just saw some political or some economic numbers come out today showing weakness in the economy, job growth almost non-existent. What say you on that? Why do your numbers reflect that as an issue that's not as strong regionally up there as it is across the country?
Well, of course, the economy is important for all of us, but sometimes the economic situations in different states play out differently. And most people, earning up here in Massachusetts areas are high earners. So potentially they might find themselves okay within a tough economy because of their positions. But what's interesting within that number is 34% of 18 to 29-year-olds in Boston rank the economy as their top issue. So threats to democracy is more of an issue for older voters, but the economy is still a top issue for the younger voters, but it's kind of being washed down by that older people looking at threats to democracy at this time.
Does that kind of point toward the affordability issue with a big city like Boston?
Exactly. On that graph, you see housing affordability at 12%, which is higher than that national number. And those are probably the young people who are trying to find a place to live. So older folks, more established, they feel comfortable in this environment. But those 18 to 29-year-olds, they're coming in. One, they're much higher on the economy, but then we see housing affordability, not just a big issue here in Boston, but we see this across the country.
And
Ted, is that something regionally you're seeing as well over in the Providence area?
Oh, yeah, undoubtedly. I mean, housing, every poll I've seen taken recently certainly in Rhode Island, I think a bunch in Massachusetts have shown housing affordability as often the top concern that people have, whether that's renting an apartment, buying a house. I know other regions of the country have seen prices reverse and start to come back down. That really has not happened here. They're not going up as fast, but rents soared after COVID, home prices soared. It's maybe leveled off the growth, but it's really high, and that's really hard for younger folks. So I think maybe the regular, I can't get a job type of worry about the economy might not be as high as it has been in certain other times. But in a way, I think those economic concerns have shifted over to affordability all across southern New England.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me bring in our other contributor, Chuck Williams from Georgia, as we head into this other topic that is coming out of Spencer's poll. It's Michelle Wu's sanctuary city policies and her position on it, which is a strong. We're keeping it. Show us that graphic, Spencer, and tell us a little bit more what you found.
Yeah, on the sanctuary cities, it's very popular here in Boston. We asked this question back before she went to her congressional hearings in March, and it was also popular then. So the voters of Boston like sanctuary policy. Remember, we're a minority majority city. So a lot of minority folks have people that they know who are involved in these sanctuary policies. Very popular. Now, across the country, that question may change and people's attitudes might be different in rural parts. But here in the city, it's quite popular, and we'll see what Trump does regarding this policy and how he tries to change it.
Ted, thoughts on those numbers? They align with the region, I suspect, as well.
Yeah, and you've had some fairly dramatic immigration enforcement actions that have gotten a lot of news coverage about here. You had that graduate student at Tufts where the video went viral of the men coming out, the ICE agents, I believe they were coming out and taking her away over an op-ed she'd written. I believe it later came out. You've had the young man south of Boston who was put in, it was a high school student. He was put in an ICE detention center for a period of time, visited by congressmen. So I think those folks have become the face frequently of Trump's immigration enforcement actions in southern New England, more than the talk of, criminals and drug dealers and all that. So again, I think some of the sanctuary city feeling is people seeing folks like that who they maybe find a bit more sympathetic being targeted and not liking that and telling the pollsters what they just told Spencer.
Let's bring Chuck into the conversation. Chuck, you are a long way away from Boston, Providence area, over in Columbus, Georgia. Kind of rural, but you got a big army post there, keeping you active and busy. Viewing from afar, from a red state with a big blue city in it, what say you on what people are thinking in the Georgia area when it comes to sanctuary cities?
We are right next to Fort Benning, as you pointed out, Chris. And as we speak, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth speaking to an officer candidate school graduation on post at Fort Benning. So we're a little bit in the national news today. But when you talk about sanctuary cities, it's a little more complicated down south, particularly in Georgia. In 2009, the Georgia General Assembly passed legislation, started as a House bill, passed legislation that essentially prohibits sanctuary cities or cities to offer refuge or sanctuary in state law. So it was looking at this, and I hope I'm accurate on this, but I think Atlanta ended up originally on a DOJ list, and I think has been removed because of inaccuracies, because the law in Georgia does not allow for sanctuary cities, does not allow mayors or county commissions to create a sanctuary area.
Which is almost a foreign language when it comes to folks up in the Northeast, passing laws that would not allow a sanctuary city policy to be enacted.
It does get a little muddy though, Chris, because here in Rhode Island, so the new DOJ list of sanctuary jurisdictions that the Trump administration put out recently has the state of Rhode Island on it. DOJ says they won't tell us the exact policy that has made them put the state in this list. They say it's up to the state to know that. But you have state officials, Governor Dan McKee, a Democrat, saying we're not a sanctuary state. We comply, we comply with our responsibilities, but we don't enforce immigration law. I think that's part of it too. It can get very muddy. What is a capital S sanctuary jurisdiction? Is it in the eye of the beholder? How is it defined? But you have Democrats up here too who don't necessarily want that label. I think Boston's a little different because it's so blue in Boston. But even when you get outside of greater Boston or the city of Providence in Rhode Island to the states as a whole, you get a much more mixed set of opinions around immigration issues.
Spencer, you've got another data set that we want to look at, and this one is the other big issue that the Trump administration is kind of managing right now is National Guard troops being deployed to big cities across the country.
Yeah, so we had this question, remember, last week in the national poll, and we're like, hey, what do you think about having National Guard in Boston? And people were somewhat against it, 48-41. This week, we asked the voters of Boston, what about the National Guard? They're against it roughly 80-20. So you can see nationally, people think, oh, maybe that's a good idea. Locally, they don't think it's a good idea. And it would be very interesting to see if the National Guard was to come in, the type of reaction people would have to them on the streets of Boston.
Ted, thoughts on that? Why is the Northeast so much more opposed to National Guard being there versus the rest of the country?
I think first it's just the general polarization we have. These are blue jurisdictions, and generally a majority. Of course, we have plenty of Trump voters. Trump won 40% of the vote in Rhode Island, 41%. So I wouldn't want to write off that those people are here, but you have a majority generally who starts out skeptical of Trump administration policies in Rhode Island, in Massachusetts. Then you also have the fact that crime, generally the crime trends have been, one thing we haven't talked about is with Michelle Wu in Boston is that crime is at, I think is it a 60-year low? It's at a very low rate compared to years past. So you might have different opinions, or at least somewhat more openness to this if people felt like crime was out of control. It's not driving a sense of crisis here that maybe it is in some other places or has in recent years. And so I think that's the thing too. People might be saying, well, they just don't think it's necessary. But that of course might not stop President Trump from deciding he wants to flex his muscles and do this, which would be, I tend to think, a very combustible situation with the reaction you'd get from the Democrats in these jurisdictions.
Right. And Chuck, what are your thoughts?
We have a little different situation here, Ted, in the way that Governor Kemp on August the 25th, so less than 2 weeks ago, deployed the National Guard to assist ICE in immigration issues in Georgia, Atlanta. Very specific. They're not to be doing enforcement. They are to be doing back office stuff, assisting in administrative type roles, the way I understand it. There's been criticism of that, and there's been praise of it. We've got both of the state party chairmen, Charlie Bailey on the Democratic side ran unsuccessfully for lieutenant governor a few years ago, and then Josh McCoon, a former state senator on the Republican side, both are from this area, from the Columbus area. And, Charlie called it reckless, said that it was an attempt to woo Trump's favor by the governor. And then McCoon said it was a great idea and had high praise for it. So, it's splitting along the lines like you would expect.
But remember, Georgia is a red state with a red governor. Massachusetts, Rhode Island, blue states, blue governors. They may not work as well with the White House on this issue.
We do have 2 blue U.S. senators.
I was going to say maybe
that
a
is
purple
true.
state.
And not even purple. It's just red with these 2 blue dots right in the center of it.
Well, its representation is as purple, or actually as blue as it can get on the Senate side. So we'll see how Senator Ossoff fares in 26, which I know you'll be covering. We got to take another quick break, gentlemen. We'll be right back with our favorite part of the show: who's up and who's down this week, per Emerson College Polling Director Spencer Kimball. We'll be right back. Well, I've been holding my breath for the past minute, so I can now exhale. And because I've been waiting for who's up and who's down this week, Spencer, who's up?
Well, as we took a look at our Boston poll, Mayor Michelle Wu is up this week. Her favorability rating from February was at 57. Now it's at 73. And we also have New York Mayor Eric Adams up in a different way, that potentially he has a way out of this race. And we'll see how that plays out with the Trump administration over the next couple of weeks.
He today just said, I wasn't offered a job. I don't know what you guys are talking about. Even though there was a lot of reporting yesterday that's saying he, may be heading toward the exit, but he's standing firm today. So we will see as this saga continues in New York. And Spencer, I have one more up, and if you can show the graphic, Donald Trump, and the reason why he's not dead, as everyone over the past week or so was talking about how the president was no longer with us because they hadn't seen him. So we want to applaud Donald Trump and put him up for being alive. So now we can move on to who's down.
Josh
Spencer?
Kraft. Yeah, I got bad news. Josh Kraft, he's down. His favorability back in February was 27-24. Now it's 26-58. People like him less after he's campaigned is not a good sign, and so we have him down at this time.
Ted, what are your thoughts on our up and down?
Yeah, it's not ideal to have your unfavorables go to the 50s after campaigning. It's funny listening to that mix of people we just talked about, though. Donald Trump clearly and the White House want to see if they can get involved in a way in this New York mayoral race to try to stop Mandami. But you look at what we're talking about here with Michelle Wu, and you wonder how much is that just going to be fuel for Mandami to play the Wu playbook, right? And say, Donald Trump, you got to vote for me to send a lesson to Donald Trump. So I think the White House is running a risk there.
Mm-hmm. Chuck, what do you think?
I can give you one up that's a little off, and it's a name that Spencer will obviously knows. Georgia Republican Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. Raffensperger is the guy who couldn't find 7,000 votes when President Trump called him in 2000, if anybody remembers. Well, he is finishing out his second term as Secretary of State, and he is close to making a decision. And I tried to press him a couple of weeks ago. The speculation is he's either going to run as a Republican for governor or for U.S. Senate. So, Spencer, that's going to be fun polling if Brad gets in either one of those races.
Yeah, he was able to stave off that primary a couple years ago.
And Ted,
he got the second most votes in Georgia behind Kemp in 24 or 22.
Ted, there may be another group of people who are up in Rhode Island this week, I'm hearing.
Swifties, Taylor Swift, she bought that house here in Rhode Island, or summer house she wrote a song about a number of years ago now, and it's all we talk about up here. We passed a Taylor Swift tax, the state, this past year to tax vacation homes, but she's apparently not holding against us because New York Post page 6 says she might have the wedding here in Rhode Island.
A Rhode Island Taylor Swift wedding.
Yep.
Fingers crossed.
Don't be a hotel room in here for a month.
I do want to just give you guys a quick plug. You can see more of Ted Nesi and his program, Newsmakers, if you watch WPRI.com. Every Sunday, Ted's got a new show on the political movers and shakers in Rhode Island. And then for Chuck, and who doesn't want more Chuck? Chuck, in his Sunday conversations on WRBL down in Columbus, Georgia, with all the movers and shakers, Chuck gets all the big interviews in Georgia. So if you're looking for Georgia news or Rhode Island news on politics, these are the two men to look for, and Google or search their names and look for their shows. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. And until next week, Spencer, Political Power Ranker is off and done, and good nighting for the weekend.